So before we get into norming the rigor bar for student responses, I wanted to share some of my insights into the FRQs on this unit exam. First of all, this short answer question number 1, number 11 on the test, is a challenging question. I think it's an important question. The test overall does not include enough about the Islamic world or the American civilizations, so it's important to include those in this short answer question. But it's a little bit square peg round hole, and it's going to be hard for students to find the right information that hits the nail on the head for this question. So let's talk about it so that we know how to set our students up for excellence. First of all, an anticipated pitfall. This question is about state formation, right? Like the Beyonce song, "Okay, states, now let's get in formation." This question is not about religion. It's not about the philosophy of Islam, for example. If a kid talks about the 5 pillars of Islam and Aztec, polytheism, that on itself is not going to answer the question because it's not specifically about state formation. Instead, they need to talk about governments and bringing people together. So more likely, we're going to see things like capital cities, emperors, taxation systems that forced everybody to obey or that strengthened the government. Okay, so that's what state formation is. So here are some possible student responses to part A in my expertise. First of all, they could talk about powerful emperors who inspired respect and thus brought people together, like Montezuma in the Aztec Empire and Mansa Musa in the Mali Empire, which, although it's not in the Middle East, is still in the Islamic world, right? It's in that large Dar al-Islam human web that existed in the yellow periodization. So that definitely counts, okay? The student could talk about religion as it supported a ruler. So it could talk about how the Islamic world had a caliphate where the emperor was both a political and a religious leader. And they could talk about how the Aztec Empire exacted tribute from conquered people in order to support the sun god and thereby brought in more loyalty from their conquered people. The student could talk about taxation. In the Islamic world, there was a tax on non-Muslims called the jizya. In the Incan Empire, the mitah system was a sort of a socialist contribution of labor by families to the state. And finally, they could talk about capital cities like Cusco and Tenochtitlan in the Mesoamerican world, Timbuktu in Mali, and Baghdad as a place where power was centralized. Okay, so those are comparisons of state formation in those two worlds. Next, so we did the first one. Let's look at the second one, continuities from pre-1200. So in order to nail this question, your students need to know what happened before the yellow periodization. And this is where those scaffolds will come in from reviewing last year. And maybe you inject some ideas into the do-nows that are going to support students accessing history after 1200. Okay, I do not think you should go to the Americas for this question. State building in the Americas before 1200 is just not very prominent in the course. I don't think students will remember the Mayan civilization unless you know a teacher who did that really well last year. Okay, better to talk about the world of Islam. Islam started as a religion and a civilization in the year 622, so we've got plenty of material to work with before 1200. I think you could talk about the role of the religion of Islam in legitimizing the leader, Muhammad before 1200, Mansa Musa afterwards, or you could talk about the role of trade, an Islamic civilization as a center of trade, and that leading to money, which allows the state to build further. Okay, so those are some possible answers. The next SAQ is should be much easier, right? It's pretty right up the alley of anybody who understands feudalism and medieval Europe. But maybe my comfort with talking about European civilization influences my evaluation there. So the first one is really talking about feudalism, right? As somebody is swearing loyalty to a local lord, and that is what feudalism is. And the second one is all about the church and the role of the Catholic Church in medieval Europe. You could prove that by talking about the tithe, which was a tax of 10% that people gave to the church, or talking about the Crusades, right? Because the church leader, the Pope, was able to inspire people to go on the Crusades. So that proves the power of the church in bringing people together, in forming a civilization. The body paragraph is about African rulers, African states, and here's the criteria for success. And I wanted to quickly zoom in on outside evidence. To me, the best outside evidence that's going to support the body paragraph is going to be powerful African rulers that are not mentioned in the documents. Mansa Musa is a sticky story that students really like about a king who was the richest man ever and went on a Hajj to Mecca and gave out a lot of charity on his way. So Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, his great uncle Sundiata Keita is another memorable story for some students. If for some reason maybe you'd like to share stories of two powerful African kings during this time period. And finally, let's quickly talk about the last point here. This should reflect the complexity point, that challenging point to get that separates the B+ students from the A+ students. And in my opinion, there are two ways to get it here. One is to make insightful relationships between and among documents, and the other is to have an abundance of outside evidence. If we look at the exemplar here, I think they're going to do that first one, insightful relationships among documents. So they really do causation very well. Trade was controlled by the ruler, which gave him more power. They do it again. This allows the Sultan to oversee the trade effectively. So there's a lot of causation happening in this paragraph. And then there's a lot of connections between documents. Saw a similar effect, and then here too, right? It's clear that this exemplar writer is not just dropping documents one at a time, but is building a unified argument about the relationship between trade and state formation. Okay, I'll give you a second to skim through this exemplar paragraph in case you haven't yet, and we will end this lovely screencastify.